Hi, Nathan here, and welcome back to another tower defense game tutorial. And in this tutorial, I'm just going to discuss how to properly create XML files for your content for your games. Now, I'm not going to create any of the XML files on camera. I'm just going to open them up and discuss how to create them based on their respective class. So, I know it's been a very long time since the first tutorial of the Tower Defense Engine series, but let's discuss that and let's discuss the actual chain of what's happening. So the first thing that's going to happen is the map loader is loaded into memory. That's the first thing that gets loaded. The map loader loads each map you have in there. In the case of my game, it's 3 maps. Each map loads towers and enemies. And then waves are also loaded in the map level as well. So let's go through the chain, and I won't go through every process and discuss everything. I'll just go into the XML and I'll discuss a few things. So the very first thing is the map loader. So if we open up that XML, and I'm going to open up that class as well, I'm going to go into the engine, and it's part of a level. So it is map loader. Okay, so the way that the engine is set up, we have writers and readers. So the way we write and read is what we need to create the XML process. So if we look here, inside the class, the attributes and the properties, we have a public list of type string for the map content names. We ignore the maps property. So we ignore this one. That is not a property, so it doesn't get created in the XML. So, the way that the readers and writers are set up is that we only write the map content names. So, let's go ahead and take a look at the XML. So, the XML is a generic bracket question mark XML version 1.0. Encoding is UTF-8, question mark and bracket. Then we have the XNA content, and in between that we have an asset of type Tower Defense Engine dot map loader. In between the asset, in between those tags, we have the map content names. Remember, that is what we are writing and reading, the map content names. Map content names. So we take that, and then that's a list of type string. So each one of each item in that list gets its own. We're actually creating the list in an XML format. Item, we're going to call it forest. Item, we're going to call it vector. Item, we're going to call it snow. So as you see here, maploader.mapContentNames.addRange, we're adding the list of strings into the map content names. We're loading that into memory. Now we're going to, like I said before, the map loader loads each map. It's loading the map that we are referencing in this current iteration by the content names. So let's go ahead and close this out, and let's look at a more interesting thing. So we're going to look at the map. Okay, so let's look at the writer. So this is a very interesting XML. It'll be very interesting to see. The very first thing we write is the name, then the dimensions, then the tile dimensions, description, thumbnail asset, tile sheet asset, ground tiles, path tiles, spawn location, spawn asset, castle location, castle asset. Is it endless or not, which we have not discussed yet. The towers that are available, the waves that are available, any sort of delay between the waves, what's the difficulty, how much money do you get, the forecolor, air color, or background asset for the info bar, the border color, the mouse texture you want to use, a small air button, small normal button, large air button, large normal button, and the queue name for the song. So what you want to do is, if you have some sort of engine, you want to look at how they are writing the data and reading the data. And your XML should do the same process. Since I'm writing the name first and reading the name first, I need to put the name first in the XML. Now, I'm just going to open up the forced map. So, the name is obviously first. Then the dimensions, then the tile dimensions. By the way, those are point values. So, we'll just say the X value, space, the Y value. And these are the things, this is the most complicated part of this whole process. You know, it's very easy to create the XML in the same way that we are reading and writing the data. But the difficult process is, well, these are points, so how do I write that in the XML? Do I put a comma? No. You just put a space for points. Now let's see if I can get a vector here. I don't know if I have any vectors or not. Does not look like it. Okay. So let's keep on going down. The tile dimensions is another point. So we put the X, and then the space, and then the Y. The description is a string, so you just type in a string like you normally would. The assets are all strings, so you just type in a string like you normally would. Now, the ground tiles and the path tiles are arrays. So you build those up like how you might expect. You provide what you want the value to be for index 0, space, index 1, space, index 2, space. So each index is separated by a space. And that's how you do an array in the XML. You just provide a number, and then a space. And then another number, and then a space. And then another number, and then a space. Now that is for an integer array. So for the ground tiles, it's an integer array. And then I just did it visually pleasing, so when I went to... This is all one single dimension array. So, you know, you could left it like this, but that will get kind of messy. So what I did is I just changed the way it looks and then made it to where it looks like a nice representation of the game. Now the path tiles, this has double digits in it, so 11. So that goes to one single index of the array. And then a space, and then a 6. That goes to a different index in the array. Okay, so now we have a nested thing here. The tower's available. So what is the tower's available? That is a list of strings. So like the map loader, we have a list of strings inside of the main class we're loading. So in that case, it's going to be a nested list. So that's what we do here. And the same thing with the waves available. Here we go. For color and error color, let's take a look at that. That is another single dimension array. So we just provide the number, space, the number, space, the number, space, the number. And that's going to say this is at index 0, 1, 2, 3. And you pretty much get the idea for arrays. You separate the index by space. And that's for integer arrays. And that's a pretty interesting thing for the XML, to have all this data in there. Okay, so that is a map. No, and close that. So now let's look at a wave. So it's part of the level wave. So I'm going to look at the writer again, and this is a shorter XML. We write the monster assets first. So let's load a wave. Let's get one of the wave XML files. Let's look at slightly fast ants. Okay, so the very first thing we do in the writer is we write the monster assets. So in the XML, we need to write the monster assets. So we have a whole bunch of, we have a list of monsters that we use. This is a list of strings, though. So we need to, all these are fast ants. So we just have a bunch of fast ants in this wave. So that is the list of monster assets. Our title is a string. This is a Boolean, so we provide true or false. This is a float, so we can provide a decimal point here. And then this is a float, I believe, just an integer. And then the boss money scalar is a float value. So you just provide a float like you normally would, just 2.0, like you normally would provide a float. Okay, so the waves are pretty simple. Let's actually look at the monsters. So each one of these is a fast ant. So that references another XML file, fast ant. And then, all right, let's discuss this description here. So let's close this, close this. Let's look at the monster class. Let's look at the writer really quick. We are writing a gameplay object first. So as you look at the fast ant, the first thing we write that's in the monster is the health. So this is the actual monster stuff here. Everything else is from the gameplay object. So all these are being written from the gameplay object. So let's go to the gameplay object and let's look at its writer. Now as you see, it writes the name, description, alpha, and speed. Now if we look at the description, it is a content serializer optional. So that is why I don't want to provide a description for a fast ant. I will make it look like this. It is just a blank description. I don't want to give it a description, so I'm just going to do bracket description / bracket. Okay, so let's go back to the monster class for a second. So what I've been trying to discuss in this video is to actually look at the writer or look at the reader and determine how the engine is writing and reading the data. Whatever is written or is being read first, you want to put first in the XML. In the case where we have derivatives, objects that are derivatives of another object, Monster is a derivative of gameplay object. In this case, let's look at the writer and let's see the very first thing that's being written is a gameplay object. So what we need to do in this case is we need to look at the gameplay object and look at how that is being written or being read. Whatever is being written first needs to be implemented first in our XML. Now, if gameplay object is a derivative of something else, we need to keep on going up in the chain, and then we go back down. So as you see, it's probably easier to look at the writer than it is at the reader. Because if you look at the reader, look at what we read first, the asset name. So just look at the writer and see what's being written first. The name. So we look at the XML, we need to put our name first. Then our description, then alpha, and then speed. Description, alpha, speed. Okay, we're done with writing the gameplay object, so we're going back down the chain. In this case, we're going back to the monster. Now we write the health, texture asset, hit texture asset, hit QName, and his boss. Health, texture asset, hit texture asset, hit QName, and is boss. Now this is all a single asset type of tower defense engine.monster, even though this is being part of the gameplay object class. Okay, so I wanted to discuss that in great detail because you will come across some game engines, and sometimes most of mine will do this as well, where we will create a derivative of a existing class. So, if I have a monster and then I want to create some specialized monsters, I might create a derivative of monster. If I really wanted to, if I wanted to make a boss its own class, I would create a boss class and it would be a derivative of monster. If I really wanted to do that. In that case, boss would write a monster. Monster would write a gameplay object. So you follow the writer and look at what's being written first. If it looks something like this, we're writing a raw object of another class, and we're using the value as a different object, and we're using a different writer. Go to that writer. So we're going to go to that writer and look at how it's writing its data. Now, if this is writing another object, you go to that object and look at how that's being written. So you go up the chain and then you go down the chain, and then just to make sure you're what you need to do with the XML. Okay, so that is pretty much it for this video. That is how you create XML using the content writers and readers. It is very useful when you're doing this. It will create the .xnb files. And then let's, just for fun, let's look at a tower here. Oh, as you can see here, we have name description. So let's look at the tower. That will be in the tower. So let's look at the writer. So the writer is name, description, thumbnail, asset. So nothing new interesting is going on here, except for these statistics. So let's look at these statistics, the tower statistics. This is a class tower statistics. Now we are just writing the object statistics. So this is pretty interesting. So if we go back to the tower, look at this initial statistics. We are creating a nested here. Nested elements is what we are creating. So the initial statistics is going to be a nested element, and we're going to give it health, damage, all the statistics we need for this tower. Now, whenever we upgrade the tower, it's going to statically upgrade by this amount. If you wanted to, you can do all sorts of cool things if you wanted to, but I chose every time you upgrade, the health will always increase 20. So if we look at the actual tower statistics, look at its writer. Now that can be a little bit tricky because I do not say it's using a different writer. But if you look at write object, you can kind of guess what it's going to do. Now, if we actually look again at where we have a list of strings, so let's look at the map loader again, because that has a list of strings. Map loader. As you saw, the map loader, let me load the XML. That is a nested element as well. So the map loader has a nested element. So you can pretty much guess that if it's a custom class, it will have to have a writer. Now this is built into the .NET framework, a list of strings. So it's going to do its own writing. But in the case where we create a custom class, we want to have our own writer. So keep an eye on those as well. It's a little bit tricky because I do not do the same thing as I do with enemies. Keep an eye out if you see write object. If it's a custom class, tower statistics, go into that class, see if it has a writer. If it does, follow its process in a nested element, and then you'll be set. So good thing I went into the tower. I would have forgot about those statistics. So it's pretty easy to build the XMLs for your content. The only thing you should worry about are in the cases where we have a monster that's a derivative of another class, and that class also has its own writer. You want to be aware of that whenever we write an object, whether it's raw or just writing the object, like here. You want to be aware of that if that's a custom class, to go into that class and see if it has its own writer. At that part where it's writing, you'll want to, in the case where we are writing the object, that will be nested. If we are writing the raw object, that will not be nested. Because this does not reference a field. This is writing the raw object of the actual value here, that object. In the case of a tower, it's referring to a property, the initial statistics property. It's referring to this property. So in that case, that will be a nested type because it's referring to a property, where this is just changing value to a gameplay object, and it's using that object's writer. So keep an eye on those. Whenever we're writing the object, writing raw object or writing an object, if it's a custom class, go into that class, see if it has its writer. If we're referring to a property here, use that in a nested element and use its writers, whatever is being written first. So use its process as you're writing the XML. So for statistics, we want to do health first because that's what's being written first in the nested type. In the case where it is not referring to a property, you do not use a nested type. Okay, so that's pretty much it for this video. I just wanted to discuss those things. Instead of me creating the XML files, I think this is a much better way to discuss things. Once you get the hang of it, you'll know what to look out for. But those are the two very important things that I can recommend. Is that look at the writer. You know, as I said, the reader doesn't really matter. Because once you saw in the gameplay object, I read the asset name, which did not need to be created in the XML. So your primary focus is look at the writer. See what's being written first. Put that in your XML. In the case of, if you see a write raw object and it's doing something similar to this, it's changing the value to a different type using the as keyword, comma, and it's using a different writer, you will want to go into that class and look at its writer. Then you want to put that in the XML. Okay, so I hope this tutorial was useful. Next tutorial, I'll give you all the content you need. The audio, the video, all the XML. Make sure you have all the textures ready. I'll give you everything you need to play the game. I will load it in the Solution Explorer with you, and then we'll run the game and see what happens. Alright, so I hope to see you next time.